Welcome back to Being Bookish. This week I am going to be taking a look at a book that has a really interesting science fiction premise, though it's not one that hasn't been tackled by authors previously. Due to the fact that I truly haven't read much that I can talk about freely this month, and I tackled one of my favourite 2026 reads, well, so far, in my previous bookish episode, this one was a tiny bit tougher to figure out, unfortunately. But I am nothing if not persistent and searched through the last few weeks, actually few months, to find a novel that I knew was both different to what I had reviewed previously and would also give me quite a lot to talk about. In this review, I'm going to be warning the human race of an invasion while running from NASA, hoping I can save my family, and wishing my life was very different in Mira Grant's 2025 science fiction horror novel, Overgrowth. I'm Ray, an unapologetic bookworm, introvert, self-confessed hermit, and long-time depression sufferer. This is my quiet space to share thoughts as I make my way through an ever-growing to-be-read pile. Seriously, if you saw it right now, you would possibly be terrified I'm going to get buried underneath it. And join me, please, as I explore the stories on my bookshelf one book at a time, with 100% honest and completely spoiler-free reviews. Step into my bookish world, and please do enjoy your stay. Since she was 3 years old, Anastasia Miller has been telling anyone who would listen that she's an alien disguised as a human being, and that the armada that left her on Earth is coming for her. Since she was 3 years old, no one has believed her. Now, with an alien signal from the stars being broadcast around the world, humanity is finally starting to realize that it's already been warned, and it may be too late. The invasion is coming. Stasia's biological family is on the way to bring her home, and very few family reunions are willing to cross the gulf of space for just one misplaced child. What happens when you know what's coming and just refuse to listen? As with every single book that I review, I am going to keep the detailed discussion and my personal opinion about the plot, the characters, any experiences, and some of the underlying themes to my review section at the end of the episode. And I am still going to maintain that whole honest and spoiler-free plan, because I really don't want to ruin anything for you. As with everything, there is a beginning, a middle, and an end. In a previous century, far away from the bustling cities and modern technology of the present day, it starts with a quiet celestial event that goes entirely unnoticed by the world at large. A small organic seed pod trailing behind a passing comet enters the Earth's atmosphere and crashes into the dense, rain-soaked woods of Washington state. This isn't a mechanical craft or a traditional spaceship, but a piece of biological technology. It's designed to survive the vacuum of space and the heat of re-entry. Upon landing, it takes root in the soil and grows into a singular, hauntingly beautiful flower that looks like nothing else on our planet. It sits there in the damp earth, waiting for years for a specific type of catalyst, which it finds in a 3-year-old girl named Anastasia Miller. While wandering near her home, Stasia encounters the flower. In a moment that's both peaceful and horrific, the plant consumes the child, breaking down her DNA and using it as a blueprint. It replaces her with a perfect biological duplicate. This is a changeling that looks, smells, and sounds exactly like the original girl, but possesses a completely alien consciousness. When this new Stasia returns to her mother Caroline, she doesn't hide her nature. From the moment she can speak clearly, she tells the truth. She is an alien and her people are coming. However, the world's got a very specific way of dealing with the impossible. For the next 30 years, Stasia's life follows a heartbreakingly predictable pattern of dismissal. As a young child, her mother and teachers believe she simply has a hyperactive and perhaps slightly morbid imagination. As she enters her teenage years, the tone shifts from amusement to concern. She's sent to various therapists and specialists who diagnose her with a range of delusional disorders, yet no amount of medication or talk therapy can change her fundamental biological reality. She grows up in a world that refuses to see her, even as she stands right in front of it. By the time the narrative shifts to the near future of 2031, Stagia's managed to carve out a remarkably mundane existence in Seattle. She works a dull office job, navigates the complexities of urban life, and shares an apartment with 2 roommates, Lucas and Mandy. She's even in a long-term committed relationship with her boyfriend Graham. Graham's a kind, patient man who loves Stasia deeply, though he treats her constant talk of an impending alien arrival as a harmless, if deeply ingrained eccentricity. He sees it as a quirk of her personality, something to be managed with love rather than fear. Crucially, while Stasia's driven by an absolute biological compulsion to warn those around her, she's actually operating in the dark. She has no idea what her true purpose is or what her people intend to do when they get here. She doesn't know that they're coming to harvest the earth. She only knows with an unshakable instinct that they're coming. It's a hollow, terrifying burden to act as a herald for the catastrophe she cannot even define. She carries out this task with a weary, almost professional diligence, telling baristas, colleagues and strangers that the Armada is on its way, even as she feels the absurdity of her own ignorance. She's a messenger who hasn't been given the full message, only the urgency of the delivery. The global status quo finally shatters when NASA and a brilliant, somewhat delusioned astronomer named Tony detect a structured signal coming from deep space. It's a rhythmic biological pulse that's unmistakably artificial and rapidly approaching Earth. This detection leads to a violent NASA incursion into Stasia's life. The authorities, finally forced to acknowledge her reality, don't see her as a person or even a messenger. Instead, she's taken prisoner by government agents and military scientists. They strip away her human rights and treat her as a biological curiosity to be dismantled and understood. Her time in captivity is a harrowing experience, where she's subjected to intense experiments and tortured in the name of national security. The scientists are desperate to find a weakness in the coming Armada or a way to communicate with it, and they view Stasia's body as a laboratory. This period of isolation and pain accelerates her transformation, which up until this point has been almost non-existent. As the stress of her imprisonment causes her human facade to fail, her skin starts to thicken and take on a rough, bark-like texture, and her internal systems revert to their carnivorous, plant-based origins, though at this point she doesn't understand what's happening. She starts to lose her taste for human food, feeling a different primal hunger as the alien biology takes over. While she's being physically held and broken down, Stasia's consciousness begins to slip into the dream forest. There's a vast psychic network shared by every scout her species has ever sent out into the cosmos. It's a place of collective memory and ancient instinct, like a hive mind. It's here she first encounters Jeff, another duplicate who's spent his entire life trying to understand his role. Unlike Stasia, who feels a sense of weary duty, Jeff's deeply unsettling. He's domineering and possesses a creepy, obsessive quality, which becomes clearer when they meet. He's frequently trying to exert control over the other scouts within the shared mental space. He mocks Stasia for her attachment to humans like Graham, Lucas, and Mandy, viewing her decades of living as a person as a biological weakness. He views their biological difference as a right to rule, and his presence adds a layer of internal psychological horror to the external biological invasion. He wants her to shed her humanity and become the predator he's already become. This situation seems hopeless until Mandy, Stasia's roommate, intervenes. In a display of fierce loyalty, Mandy helps Stasia escape from the government's clutches, acting under the guise of working with the NASA scientists. This act of friendship allows Stasia to reunite with Graham and flee towards Maine to find Tony. The astronomer's got her own secret history with the invaders, having narrowly escaped a similar fate to Stasia's as a child. Tony's one of the few humans who believes Stasia without hesitation because she's seen the green world waiting, sinister in the shadows. As the group travels across a crumbling America, the green dawn begins. Small pods begin to rain down across the globe, and the existing flora of Earth starts to mutate. Trees become predatory, vines move with intent, and the very grass underfoot begins to develop a taste for protein. The natural world is being repurposed as a weapon against the entire human population. The journey remains under constant threat from the remnants of the United States government and military, represented by figures including Agent Miller, who is absolutely horrific in her own state. These agents continue to hunt Stasia and her friends, still viewing her as a biological bridge to an enemy they have no chance of understanding. Eventually, Stasia's consciousness expands further through her connection to the hive mind. Most significantly, she communicates with an ancient entity known as First, a repository of millions of years of biological memory and her own parent. It's through First that the true terrifying nature of the arrivals finally explained, filling in the blanks that Stasia has carried her entire life. The humans have spent decades imagining first contact as an exchange of technology or a war for territory, but the invaders don't care about human politics, gold, or oil. They're a purely predatory species that views sentient life as a particularly high-grade form of compost. They travel from star system to star system, seeding worlds with scouts to gather data and pre-process the environment. When the Armada arrives, it isn't to rule, but to harvest the accumulated energy of the planet's biomass. To the invaders, humanity isn't an enemy. It's a crop that's finally reached its peak nutritional value. As the massive alien armada enters the atmosphere, the scale of the disaster becomes absolute and irreversible. The invaders don't recognize human authority or personhood. They only see a harvestable organism. Stasia stands as the only being who truly understands the transition, as the world everyone knows is steadily overtaken by the overgrowth. And it's time for the traditional Being Bookish public service announcement. I am not reviewing this book to influence you one way or the other. Please read what you want to. Pick up any book that sparks joy or takes your fancy. Reading should be fun, not a chore. DNF when you want to. Read what you love. And above everything else, this is not a competition. Whether you read 5 books in a year or 500, as long as you enjoy, that's truly all that counts. Anyway, less of that. Let's see what others thought about Overgrowth before I get to my own feelings on the book. Orbiting the Shelf wasn't so keen on this book, giving it 1.5 stars and saying, 1.5 stars out of 5. A promising premise buried beneath preachy YA tropes. Overgrowth by Mira Grant opens like a horror thriller knockout, gruesome, unnerving, and full of potential. The brutal child death scene in the intro made it clear this wasn't pulling punches. But just as quickly as the tension builds, the book does a genre bait and switch. What begins as science fiction horror nosedives into a preachy, painfully shallow YA story about how being different is okay, and humans should be nicer. Let me be clear, it's not the message I take issue with, it's the execution. Important themes deserve better than being wrapped in cardboard characters and a tone so soft it undercuts any emotional weight. The horror vanishes by chapter 3, never to return, and the story meanders through painfully predictable YA beats. Worse, The book constantly repeats its message, "Oh God, I'm so different, I'm an alien, nobody believes me," as if the author is afraid the reader will forget the point. There's no trust in your intelligence, no faith in your ability to draw meaning on your own. It's almost insulting. It's the kind of book that seems to dare you to criticize it by hiding behind its messaging, but even strong social commentary can't save weak storytelling. Overgrowth could have been a sharp, terrifying parable. Instead, it felt like a rough draft that forgot what genre it was writing in. Despite being in what I have always considered a rather popular genre and having an intriguing premise, I was disappointed to see that the number of reviews and ratings for Overgrowth didn't give me that much to choose from. There were several negative and positive reviews that were either incredibly short, one line, or so long that they could have been a degree thesis. Seriously, I appreciate that you've got a lot of opinions, but can you keep it brief? Sometimes. It took me a little while, but I was able to find reviews that gave both sides of the story, good and bad. For me, it's always really important to have that balance before I get into my own feelings on the book I'm talking about. The overall rating for Overgrowth is actually pretty different when looking at the various platforms. On Goodreads, for example, it has a 3.54, and over on Storygraph, it's a 3.71, which, as I've already mentioned, feels rather low for a science fiction and horror novel that plays on the emotions and talks about the popular social feeling of the day, especially when it comes to the survival of a planet being consumed by commercialism, destroyed by greed, and that lack of kindness and understanding that as humans we should all appreciate. Right now, the book has 4,192 ratings and 1,226 full reviews on Goodreads, and on Storygraph it has 1,956 ratings and 535 reviews. It appears as though this book just didn't hit the right note for the majority of readers, and as I received it in my Starbright box, I can't help but wonder how many subscribers haven't picked their copy up yet, whatever their views on the book end up being. Kimberly read Overgrowth and, as a massive fan of everything Mira Grant writes, gave the book 5 stars. She said, "I automatically buy anything written by Mira Grant, aka Sean Ann Maguire. From her Newsflesh trilogy to her Parasite trilogy, she delivers hair-raising tales that are unforgettable. As Maguire, she delivers fantasy stories that keep me begging for more. My bookshelves are lined with Mira Grant novels, and I have all her Maguire books as audiobooks. Before we begin, I want you to remember, this is just a story. It can't hurt you anymore." The story begins with a story about a 3-year-old little girl named Anastasia Miller, who walks into the woods, went missing for 3 days, and returned claiming to be an alien. The point of view delivered by Stasia fast forwards from age 3 to adulthood. Stasia has always been a little weird, what with the whole claiming to be an alien story, but she graduated from college, has a job, a boyfriend, and lives with 2 roommates and her beloved cat. Then an alien message is intercepted, and Stasia knows it's time. Her people are coming to get her. The countdown to the invasion has come. Grant Maguire is a brilliant storyteller, and she delivered a compelling, thought-provoking look at first contact. She tackles tough social questions, humanitarian issues, love, and choices. It was creepy, horrifying, and had me on edge from the very first page. The suspense built as questions arose. Will humanity survive? What happens when first contact is so subtle no one believes? What happens when something new wants to take over? Stasia was a multifaceted character, an orphan, really, raised among humans, but other. The story masterfully portrays her difficulties, chosen family, and her life bridging 2 cultures. Stasia's transformation, the alien history, and beings were realistically depicted, making the horror believable. Perfect for fans of alien invasions, thought-provoking questions are blended into sci-fi horror. I highly recommend taking Overgrowth on vacation with you this summer. I have to be completely honest here. This positive review hits differently than many of the others that I read because the reviewer is clearly a massive fan of the author, which potentially could give the review an element of bias. I could say that, to be fair, this is the case for a multitude of books. Anything by many recent authors who have a certain level of popularity could be considered to have the same kind of fan love associated with them. I love this book because it was written by an author I adore. Just look at the fanaticism that comes with the reveal of a new book by R.F. Kuang, Sally Rooney, or Stephen King. Which reminds me, have you heard my latest spin-off episode? Here's a little ad. Not suitable for younger ears, but something I really enjoyed prepping for and recording is my Stephen King review with Lorraine of The Dead Zone as part of my spin-off series, A Stephen King Thing. And now back to the episode. Anyway, do I think that there is a potential for bias? Absolutely. But that does work both ways. In the last few years, I have seen review blasts against authors because of something they said or something they believe. When the latest novel in the Empyrean series, Onyx Storm, was first released, it was given thousands of negative scores because people had interpreted something the author said, declaring her as a Zionist, in their view. These reviews were subsequently removed in a massive clear out of the various platforms. However, she is not the only victim. Many do the same to books by J.K. Rowling, Gabrielle Zevin, Sarah J. Maas, and more, for multiple reasons. Anyway, less of that. I am getting off track, as I quite often do. This is probably a subject for another day, but it is an important one and something I need to give more thought to and definitely need to do more research into, because I think it's something to consider for another episode or something else at a later date. Right, now that I've mentioned what others are saying, here's what I really think about Overgrowth by Mira Grant. No spoilers, just me being 100% honest. Did I like the book? Until I received this, I had never heard of Mira Grant nor Sean-Ann Maguire. This was the second ever Starbright box. It took me 10 months to get around to reading it, though I found the cover to be beautifully designed. It's stunning, and the story sounded sort of intriguing. What I loved the most about it when I shelved it originally was the fact that it was unlike anything I had previously purchased. That all having been said, the promise of science fiction intrigue wasn't enough to win against my favourite read of 2025, The Raven Scholar, or The Society of Unknowable Objects, or The Mirror of Beasts, all of which I received in the April-May run-up, and all of which I read in that month. Though I haven't read all that much in the way of science fiction horror, I was anticipating something that was a little bit Day of the Triffids, which I will admit here gave me chronic nightmares as a child. That 1980s TV series and the noise of the Triffids legitimately kept me awake at night for years. Melded with Audrey 2 from Little Shop of Horrors, because that's what the book promised me. It even says it in the précis. Of course, what I was expecting versus what I got was maybe something resembling that TikTok video that's often used as a stitch. The one with the girl complaining about her manicure. You know, this is what I wanted. This is what I got. I'm really crying now. It's so ugly. And that's my impression. And here I am going to sound very old as I admit that until this moment I had never seen the original video. I can see why she wasn't happy with her nails, but has she not heard of nail polish remover? Okay, so where am I going with this? I feel as though I was promised this incredible novel. There was so much potential for it to be sinister, a warning, and scary as heck. But somewhere along the way, something was lost in favour of a message. Anastasia Miller is not who she appears to be. At the age of 3, she was murdered by the organism that now inhabits her space, her family, and her history. This creature lived the life that could have been Anastasia's had she not wandered into the woods one day and been absorbed into a pod and spat out like unwanted material. That in itself is horrifying. But instead of learning more about this, we skip ahead almost 30 years to 2031, when Anastasia has set up a life for herself. A rather mundane existence, granted, but she's happy-ish, despite having this warning inside her, one she gives whenever anyone asks her about herself, that she is an alien and her race is coming to Earth. This could build into something so much darker. It has so much promise. I waited with bated breath for the build-up to become something, for the race to save everything to begin. But instead it sort of fell flat, at least for the majority of the book and for me as the reader. There are so many moments that had the potential to be something more, but they were tame in comparison to books and stories I've read in the same sphere. Though the book was short, Stephen King's The Mist it's horrifying, a science fiction tale with a very strong horror twist. Then there's Stranger Things, which could also be considered to have the same tone. These characters, the aliens from Stasia's home planet, are the worst sort of carnivores, consuming the inhabitants of planets they invade. But even this is toned down somewhat. Every direction I turned in, I could see the potential for the book to be that much darker, so much more terrifying. They were being ignored, though the reason behind it wasn't clear, at least to me. There were a number of moments where the story showed a great deal of potential. Stasia is going through this terrifying transformation, which she slowly adjusts to, despite there being one final step she doesn't want to take. As the invasion grows closer and she builds bonds with others who were taken over by alien pods, of which there were apparently many thousands across the earth, her transformation is slow, agonizing, and so frightening. She is slowly becoming something she is unfamiliar with. It's one thing to know without a shadow of a doubt that you are an alien, but to see that transformation, to watch as you are growing into something unrecognizable, is something else entirely. And with that knowledge, Stasia realizes that she's not there to protect, to save. She is there to devour, to demolish, to kill the people who have been part of her life, her friends, her lover. Ultimately, Stasia realizes that there's no last-minute reversal. She's not living in a Will Smith movie where there will be a chance to save everyone and for her to live in peace. The reality of it all is that Earth is doomed. That in itself is a message for the reader. She can't save her friends, and while the hive mind of her people will be with her, she can either accept what is to come or face their wrath. As I said, the book has so much potential, but I believe that the author held back too much. Were there elements that were gory, graphic, and frightening? Absolutely. But I don't think they went far enough, and that's a really weird thing for someone who doesn't like horror movies to say. I went into the novel expecting terror. Not quite nightmare-inducing, I really don't want that from a book anymore, but enough to make me visibly shudder. And I just feel that Grant pulled back from the edge a little bit too soon. This could have been a book that made you think, while also perhaps encouraging you to view the blinking light in the night sky as a what if. When all's said and done, I will take a look at other books that Grant has written, because she has got skill, she has a way with words. I am just not going to be rushing out to buy the entire back catalogue in any hurry. If you enjoy Overgrowth or you want to read something similar, these are ones to look at. There are so many books I could put here, starting with one I've already mentioned, Stephen King's The Mist. It is a short story, but it certainly packs, as most of his short stories do, a very powerful punch. I know that they've made a movie, a TV series, and are about to make another version of the film. For me, the book was the best one. The science fiction elements weren't immediately clear, but it feels like the perfect blend of horror and science fiction. And the ending, whichever version you look at, is terrifying. Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham lives in the back of my mind as the sort of book that just exists to terrify. As a 7-year-old, I was stupidly allowed to watch the BBC miniseries, and the noise that the carnivorous alien plants made as they scuttled along the streets, searching out their next unwilling victim, haunts me. This book is what I truly feel Overgrowth had the potential to become. It even has a similar beginning, with the original invasion beginning quietly following the passing of a comet. March has been a somewhat quiet month when it comes to my reading. I have so far finished 8 books. A couple were admittedly rather chunky, while several were NetGalley proofs that tested my resolve. I even had my first DNF of the year, much earlier than I had anticipated. Strangely, the book I chose not to finish was, to the point I read, better than one I pushed through and read to the end back in February, earning my lowest rating of the year to date. That doesn't mean it will be the lowest rating of the year, just that it is so far. We're heading, though, now into what will be an incredible few months, or at least I hope they will, where book orders are concerned. I'm waiting for my first ever Mindsight box, the Fairy Loot special edition of the Wolf King. The Night Prince is due out in the next few months, and I did get a special pre-order of that, but I didn't get onto the signed list because I signed on too late, and I was in a meeting. That was really embarrassing. Actually, that was truly embarrassing. I had just got onto the reserve list on Fairy Loot, the waiting, the time is counting down, and it switched over to you can now buy just as I went into an urgent meeting. That was really embarrassing. I'm sitting there telling my new boss, can I just quickly buy this book? I wasn't actually meant to be on my lunch break, but that's another tale entirely. I also I believe at least, that the final book in A.T. Qureshi's Baby Dragon series is out for delivery. Well, at least I think it was as I wrote the script. It now turns out it's coming tomorrow. I'm also looking forward to the books arriving in April, including Rights of the Starling. And seriously, May is now bordering on the when the heck am I going to have time to read all of these books category, because that list is just growing and growing, and it's getting quite scary. Of course, I am still waiting to hear the news on The Fox in Winter, which is the sequel to The Raven Scholar by Antonia Hodgson, because surely the release date has to be announced soon. It's been a year since that book came out, and I need to know what happens next. I know you're likely expecting a second review at this point. Sadly, though I have read a number of novels, the shorter ones that I feel I could talk about now are not due for release until at least the summer. In fact, the book I'm reading right now is not coming out until August. So they are embargoed until that point. And the larger books I've read really deserve episodes of their own. However, my plan is to be back to my usually scheduled programming for the next episode in April. So it's not too long, really. Well, that's it for this week, and thank you so much for listening. If you're enjoying the show, why not share it with your friends or family, and please do leave a star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, because it truly does help get people aware of the fact that this little podcast has been going for 5.5 years. You can find me on Instagram at beingbookishpod, on X at being_bookish, and on TikTok at beingbookishreviews, though I need to get back on there again. It's been a few weeks because I've been rather rushed off my feet and not feeling quite with it enough to sit in front of a camera. If you prefer reading, head to beingbookish.co.uk for spoiler-free reviews, my 2026 reading tracker, and all the links to the podcast episodes in one place. Until next time, this is me saying farewell.